as co-artist in residence in print media. Cooper works in a range of print media, video, and sound. In 2015, he was awarded the Media Residency at the Clock Tower Gallery and the Keyholder Residency at the Lower East Side Print Shop in New York. His prints have been described as striking by Paul Coldwell in Art and Print, and his video work has been praised by Sarah Schmerler of Art in America as magical and infinitely watchable. He was awarded the Prix de Print by Art and Print magazine in 2017. This past spring, Cooper was awarded the ProCam Best Regional Filmmaker Award at the 57th Annual Film Festival at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Please welcome Cooper Holoweski.
All right, hello, thank you for that introduction. I'm Cooper Holoweski. Last year I did this AIR presentation and it was sort of like my greatest hits from the past 6 or 7 years. So this year I thought I'd focus on some new works that, there are some new works. I thought I'd focus on some works that I don't often talk about, as well as some newer works and some works in progress. So in the interest of being vulnerable in front of an auditorium full of about 200 people, here we go. I wanted to kick things off with this series of paintings titled Effigies from 2014 and 2015. They are these still life shrines that all include pieces of iconic mid-century modernist furniture, sometimes broken, sometimes intact. I actually showed a few of these in my presentation last year, but I kind of glossed over them quickly because, to be honest, they're difficult for me to talk about. I love these paintings, but whenever I speak about them, I end up tripping over myself because there are so many weird little contradictions built into them. And I'll probably trip over myself a bit today. They're all mixed media works that incorporate 3D modeling software, Xerox transfer, collage, and acrylic paint on canvas. All the color is hand-painted. Each piece is a little bit different, but essentially they all begin with a digital 3D model of a piece of mid-century furniture. This 3D model is exported to Photoshop, where it's combined with images of materials like cinder blocks, 2x4s, and plywood to make a still life. This still life is then printed on a large format Xerox printer. This printout is then painted and transferred to a large piece of stained canvas. So there's this kind of printerly way of thinking about the image being mirrored when it's transferred. So everything that's on the left will be on the right after the image is transferred to the canvas. The candles are then collaged onto the canvas, and the entire still life gets taped off, and I apply thin layers of acrylic paint and wipe the paint away in concentric circles around the candles to get this kind of luminous glow. Each of these paintings measure approximately 50 inches by 36 inches, so as objects they have a relationship with the body. Here's an installation shot from a 2-person show with Clive Murphy. It was called The Viewing Room, and it was at GCA in Brooklyn. The gallery laid white carpet on the floor and required that everyone take off their shoes before entering, so it was a pretty immersive experience. The title of the show comes from both the viewing room and the back of a blue chip gallery where collectors can view works from storage, but also comes from the viewing room in a funeral home. Clive Murphy did all the sculptures. I can't take credit for them. Here's a few more installation shots. This is from a 3-person show at Present Company, Brooklyn on the left, and a solo show at Small Editions on the right. So, to actually dig into these things a little bit, this is the first piece I made in the series, and it's called Noguchi Table Effigy. For as loaded as the piece is with different symbols, I was actually working pretty intuitively when I made this. There's the bottom of this famous Noguchi table, this high modernist design. There are these cinder blocks, a very everyday material, and there are these candles, which I think of as really pushing the piece into the kind of melodramatic. Before I made this painting, I kept drawing different arrangements of these objects in my sketchbook and playing around with them, but doing so without a clear endpoint for what this image would mean. When I finished the piece, I felt a little bit like Richard Dreyfuss's character from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I don't know if you're familiar with that film, but I have a clip that I think describes it pretty well. She's so good. Everybody is so concerned about him. I can't describe it, what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. This means something. It's important. I love this scene because it's so heartfelt and sincere and also absurd and hilarious. Richard Dreyfuss is kind of this conduit for these messages coming from extraterrestrials, and he's describing them through a plate full of mashed potatoes. And his wife is crying, and his children are crying. I admire how this 2-minute clip can hold these very seemingly contradictory feelings together. This is the second piece I made in the series. I'm going to whip through these. Here's the third piece I made in the series. I'm whipping through them because I had this kind of feeling after I had these first three together, and they kind of started a dialogue that would inch towards my feelings about nostalgia and materialism. And I started to, I'm not certain that I'm not sure that I still am fully sure what they mean, but they mean something. They're important. But when I had these three done, they started to posit some interesting questions for me, right? Are they celebrating modernism or reiterating its failures? Are they affirming or critical? Is this a seance or a funeral? Can it be all of these things at the same time? Also, what world do these live in? Things get even more complicated when we start to pick apart individual elements of the works. There's, again, this iconic mid-century furniture mixed with the dramatic tenebrae and light that I associate with old masters' paintings. And there's also this gloss varnish that lends itself, certainly to me, to pre-20th century painting. There's also this mixture of utilitarian objects, high-end design objects mixture of utilitarian objects with high-end design objects that ironically have their roots in utilitarianism from the Bauhaus, which is one of several sub-narratives going on in these pieces. So we end up with this compression of history, this compression of class, and these multiple kind of interwoven narratives. It feels to me like a ghost of cultural baggage that began before I was born, but continues to accumulate and won't leave me alone. This is the last painting I'm going to talk about from the series. There's 8 of them, but I don't want to spend my whole presentation talking about these paintings that I don't fully understand myself. It's called Philip Johnson Chair Effigy, and I think it encapsulates a lot of the ambivalence I consciously or unconsciously tried to pack into these works. There's something both refined and nefarious about this one, which is how I feel about Philip Johnson and modernism in general. It's brilliant and elegant and also kind of evil. The next piece I want to talk about is this one called Noeticus. I made this piece specifically for a gallery called Sister, which existed solely as a window display. Sister was run by the artists Jennifer Lee and Zuriel Waters for about 4 years. They're 2 artists and curators who lived on a highly trafficked corner in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and they used this window for curatorial projects. As many of you know, commercial rent in Brooklyn is often cost prohibitive, so this was a creative way for these guys to flex their curatorial muscles and cultivate a community with a resource they already had, a window. I'm going to read a text by the curator because I think he wrote about it really eloquently. This was written by Zuriel Waters. Noeticus is a reference to noetics, a New Age branch of philosophy used in parapsychological research and science fiction with a focus on exploring psychic phenomena and the role of consciousness in the cosmos. For this project, Holoweski has created a hard-edged geometric sculpture out of cardboard and specialty color-shifting plexiglass that changes depending on the angle of the viewer. Loosely based on the Platonic solid, but intimate and ambivalently functional, the object careens between the poles of idealist abstract form and Baroque consumer object. He has set this against a diagrammatic backdrop illustrating a rock's transformation into icosahedron that seems to suggest an evolutionary imperative towards an ideal form. Related to the study of noetics as a study of human potentials, the rock becomes a symbolic figure of human progress, set forth with the improbable destination of transcendence, but stalled out somewhere along the way. So as I mentioned, this gallery only exists from the outside. You could only see the works from as you were passing by. But Jenny and Zuri would, for openings, they would open up their apartment, and oftentimes they would show like supplemental works that went along with the piece that was being shown in the window. So I showed this video, or I made this video specifically for it. This video is called Failed Evolution. It's a loop. I'm just going to let it run for another 15 minutes, and that'll be the end of my presentation. This was another one-off project called Still Life with Broken Hard Drives. This was a postcard I designed for Small Editions. Small Editions is a gallery and publisher of artists' books in Brooklyn. They also publish these artist postcards. This is an image of Karina Reynolds of Small Editions holding the postcard. When I was working on this project, I got thinking about the idea of the postcard and how it's a sort of anachronistic method of communication. In many ways, it's been replaced by technologies like email, texting, and others. So I wanted to directly reference digital media in the image because that felt like a nice tension. Also, postcards typically have images of landmarks and beautiful vistas, so an image of a pile of broken hard drives felt like kind of a funny move. The other thing I found myself thinking about is that the physicality of a postcard is what keeps it relevant. So in the interest, again, of creating a bit of a contradiction, I wanted this postcard to feel as slippery and ephemeral as possible. And to me, there's nothing more slippery and ephemeral than digital 3D modeling. So I ended up with this postcard of a digital 3D model of a pile of broken hard drives. Lastly, as someone steeped in the world of print media, I really enjoy making something that was mass-produced and easily distributed. So I have a particular affinity for this project. And the next one. This past summer, I made a project with Pressure Club, a gallery and print shop in Philadelphia. It's a two-sided silkscreen that they printed in their shop. The one side has this reference to the figure with these floating 3D models of body parts, the surfaces of which are all made from Bed Bath & Beyond coupons. The other side of the print has a photo of a Mobius strip infinity symbol made from a CVS receipt. After these prints dried, they were hand-folded and sold here. So outside the gallery space at Pressure Club, they have this old newspaper machine called Mr. Distro, where patrons can pay $1 for a limited edition screen print. If you're in Philadelphia, I highly recommend spending $1 on a screen print. Mine is gone now, but they have an amazing group of artists coming through and making prints for Mr. Distro. When my piece was folded, it made this nice little wave at passersby. I don't think I can, it just kind of had this little hand sort of waving to people walking by. For my artist statement, I wrote a haiku. The ghost becomes flesh, finds meaning in surroundings. Flesh dies, ghost returns. This is more or less what it looked like inside the machine, just a stack of these folded two-sided prints. And when you started to open it, it looked like that. Both images were printed as halftones, so similar to a lot of industrial printing, similar to the way that newspapers are printed, to create this illusion of tonal range. Again, halftone printed. This side was printed in silver ink on white paper. The title, I can't remember if I told you the title of this piece is called Real Presence. It's a reference to the phenomenon of real presence from Christian theology, which I should clarify. So mine is spelled P-R-E-S-E-N-T-S, but in Christianity, real presence is P-R-E-S-E-N-C-S, which is the idea of the actual manifestation of Christ in the bread and wine of the Eucharist. I don't have a religious background, so this is all based on Wikipedia research, and I could very well be getting some of it wrong. But I think a lot of what we do as artists includes taking materials of little or no value and manipulating them in a way that transforms them into something sacred, or at least of more value than the raw materials. And that to me feels like a sort of magic sorcery akin to religious transubstantiation. It's a tough word, transubstantiation. I like the idea of this magic going awry and running into the everyday foibles of contemporary capitalism. This is a series of prints that are in progress right now called Eden. I figured that I would keep this presentation lighthearted on the topic of Christianity for a minute. So these are all digital mock-ups right now, but there's 3 of them that are done-ish. There's 2 of them that are done and one that's almost done. We'll look at in a second. In the Eden series of etchings, I explore the Genesis narrative through contemporary consumer technologies. Inspired by Gustave Doré's engravings from the King James Bible, this work combines traditional printmaking techniques with digital 3D modeling and laser engraving. I'm interested in how the pluralism of digital culture and world building can supplant historical singular narratives and the implication this has on our deepest beliefs. So just to quickly walk through this series, this is the kind of, I don't have a point. Oh, I do have a pointer. There we go. So this is sort of the let there be light moment. This is a slightly stylized version of what it looks like when I open up Cinema 4D or any other 3D modeling software and I say put a light there. So this specific print also still has like the file name on top too. Like there's the window that you have in a Mac operating system. And it's titled light.jpg. This is the sort of proto-Earth, proto-Eden piece with these rock cairns made out of wireframes of 3D models of rocks. This is my Adam and Eve thing. It's these kind of floating 3D models of body parts, just floating through the sky because they just appear. And this is my tree of knowledge, and this is sort of outside of the Garden of Eden. We'll take a closer look at some of these. Again, these are the digital mock-ups, but this is how they end up looking a little grittier. This one is still in the works yet and doesn't have a title yet. Again, it's hinting at this kind of proto-Earth or proto-Eden with these wireframe rock cairns. Wireframes constitute a basic structure for digital 3D modeling. This one is referencing the tree of knowledge from Genesis. Instead of apples, this tree has virtual reality headsets as fruits. This piece and the next one are actually finished, and they're currently in a group show, as Susan mentioned, at David Klein Gallery that just opened on Saturday, along with some works by the wonderful Emmy Bright. And this is the last one from the series and represents when we're away from our computer screen and depending on our phones for escape. It's called Outside the Garden, and it's a variable edition of 8. So each of these prints has a different image on one of the phones that's a Google map location of the Garden of Eden according to 8 popular theories on Reddit. The last few pieces I want to talk about are these video traps. You can't really see it too well there, but you'll get a slightly better image of it and get an idea. Last year I was thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For me, so much of making art is about trying to reach some sort of self-actualization, but running into the clunkiness of everyday life. So I tried to think about what covers our basic physiological needs in Bloomfield Hills in 2019, right? Like we got to take care of the first thing first. Food, clothing, warmth, shelter, these kind of things. So I started making these little shelters out of flat screen TVs from Best Buy. They also kind of resemble basic animal traps, which is no coincidence. I made 3 of these pieces to provide us with food, clothing, and warmth. And of course, the television itself provides us with shelter. Here's food. clothing. And warmth. Oh, this projector is a little bit darker than my screen. It's a pile of iPhones, or not iPhones, of Apple Watches playing a video of a bonfire in the middle of the woods. I'm glad a few people chuckled at my description. Thanks for that. So as I mentioned earlier, I think there's a magic to what we do, transforming raw materials into something sacred. For me, there's also something very personally transformative about the practice as well. So I want to close by wishing everyone a fruitful and transformative school year. Let us all self-actualize with Nutella and CVS receipts and VR headsets and whatever else we have to guide us there. Thank you.